All right, so I wanted to show you how you can mix a vocal pretty well using just stock plugins. I'm using Studio One, but you can use pretty much whatever DAW that you use. I imagine that they're going to have comparable plugins that you can use for this. So let's talk about kind of the three things to focus on. So the first thing is you want to cut out everything that you don't want using EQ. The second thing is you want to compress the audio. And number three is you want to add any effects or even higher end EQ sparkle to make it pop out of the mix. I find if you kind of follow those three guidelines in order, it pretty much works most of the time. So let's talk about that. So the first thing that we do is we add an EQ. This is just a song that I've been working on. I just put these vocals on not too long ago. And so typically there's a few things that I like to cut. One is I will cut away the high frequencies, or I'm sorry, the low frequencies right away, because that's going to be all your mud and nastiness that you just don't want in the recording anyway. So I just have a quick button that I can hit that does that. But if you don't, then you can just drag your low filter. And I typically like to make it a little bit steeper. So I'll do that. And anywhere around 80 hertz, 100 hertz maybe, to just cut out all the nastiness. So we'll do that. And then typically there's also sort of this boxy region around 500 hertz, and I'll let you listen to what that sounds like. Getting laid at that rooftop bar. Smells of wine. So if I bring this up, typically the way I find the frequencies I want to cut out is I literally will just boost this almost all the way and just sweep it through until I find all the garbage that I don't like. So if we go around 500 hertz, you'll notice that there's this nastiness. Cigars, another sip of your Coke and rum. They play the song you said you love. Right there, it just sounds like, I don't know. It's in your face and it's not good. So I'll take that and I'll cut it, wrong one, and I'll cut it down, usually by about 6 decibels. And then usually there's a nasally region too. So if we listen to this and sweep. At that rooftop bar, smells of wine and cheap cigars, another sip. Right there, it gets nasally. You can hear how there's this high end, there's just bad frequencies in there. So again, this is all based, there's no science to it per se. You just kind of want to listen to what frequencies don't sound very good, and that's going to be very much dependent on the voice that you're recording. And those are pretty much the only things that I do for that. The next thing is I will add the Autotune, or in my case, the Waves Real Tune. And so for this, I just pick the key, C major. I do tenor because that's pretty much the range that I sing in, and I leave everything else default. The reason I put this after the EQ is because any sort of muddiness might alter the ability of the auto tune or real tune to identify the note. So if we cut out the muddiness, I just think it makes it a little more precise in how it analyzes the tone coming into it. So then we have that. So with those two things, we have this. Rooftop bar, smells of wine and cheap cigar. So again, typically I would be mixing this with the instrumental track, but just so you get a sense of how everything sounds step by step, I'll go through it on solo. The next thing, which is the big thing, is we're going to compress it. So with this, I'm just using a 2A compressor that Studio One happens to have. You can use whatever compressor you want. This one I just like because it's super easy to use. And so with it off, it sounds like this. Getting laid at that rooftop bar. And on, it sounds like this. Smells of wine and cheap cigar. So really what I'm looking for with compression is I'm not trying to squash it, unless you want it to be like that, but I'm not, because when I'm looking at this audio level here, it's not looking too dynamic, so it's not necessarily something I have to squash anyway. So, but typically I just use this peak reduction. So if it started maybe here, I just want to increase it until we start to see about maybe 3 to 5 decibels where it's kind of hitting those higher volumes. Sip of your Coke and rum, they play the song you said you love. Seconds later we were dancing there. So kind of like around there. And then if the gain typically starts a little bit lower, so you just want to add makeup gain to make it sit in the mix well. So I'll add the mix in. Getting laid at that rooftop bar, smells of wine and cheap cigars, another sip of your Coke and rum, they play. Boom. And I'll typically just do something like that. All right, and then the next thing, so now we've taken out what we don't want using EQ. We've done the auto tune. We've done the compression. Now we need to add what we do want. So this is high EQ sparkle as well as delay and reverb, which we'll talk about. So the final thing as far as the inserts is I add a vintage EQ just because it tends to add a little more analog sound. So what we're trying to add is some airiness and presence to the vocal. So without this, it sounds like this. Getting laid at that rooftop bar. And then with it, it sounds like this. Smells of wine and cheap cigars. Another sip. So it pops out of the mix a lot more. And so again, it's all just based off of ear, but these typically start off as 0 when you open it. And so I will just adjust it up until it sounds like it pops out of the mix pretty well. Laid at that rooftop bar. Smells of wine and cheap cigars. Another sip of your Coke and so this high middle frequency basically controls how present it is, and then the high frequency shelf controls basically that airiness of it. So you can mess with that. Just don't get overblown with that because it can also add some harshness to it if you overdo it. And so that's pretty much all I have for the inserts, and then we have the effects. And so for that, I will add them to a send channel. So here I have a reverb, and this is just a stock plugin on Studio One, and it's just a preset. Nice vocal, always sounds good. I just hit that, I don't touch anything. And then I have a delay channel, which is analog delay. I usually it depends on the song, but for this I've used a quarter note delay, feedback at 20% so it doesn't linger on too long. And then the dry wet signal is always 100% because you alter that through your sends. So this is basically, think of this as like a volume for your reverb and delay. So if we turn that on, it sounds like this. Getting laid at that rooftop bar, smells of wine and without it, it sounds like this. Cheap cigars, another sip of your Coke. And then with everything, Coke and rum, they play the song you said you love. Seconds later, we were dancing there. I feel the room just stop and stare. So that definitely adds, it definitely makes it sit in the mix, the reverb and the delay, and just gives it some space while still still having the presence because of that EQ gain that we added at the end of the insert. So to me, this sounds like a really good sort of vocal chain to use for a pop vocal. And like I said, pretty much you could probably find most of this in whatever DAW that you happen to use. I might make a video on sort of my favorite vocal chain that I've used for paid plugins, but I thought this would be much more useful for a lot of people who just happen to have stock plugins to use. If you have any comments on things that maybe I should include in further videos, let me know. And then when it is available, you can actually check out this video on the vocal chain that I use for the paid plugins that I use. All right, I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.